Welcome to Under the Lens. Come and enjoy an extraordinary, raw, and unfiltered podcast that delivers debate, discussions, and interviews about film, pop culture, and everything in between. Here is your host, film critic and journalist, Byron Lafayette.
Hey all, and welcome to Under the Lens. So happy that you could join us today. We're going to be doing a first of a special series of episodes, and we are calling it Blast from the Past. And basically, these episodes are going to be all based on nostalgia and, looking back on TV shows, movies, pop culture that we are nostalgic about. And generally, what the format of these episodes are going to be is I'm going to have a guest who comes on, and it will be up to the guest to choose what they would like to talk about and what they're nostalgic about. So today I have as my guest my friend JB Huffman. And for you guys who have listened to the show before, you will recognize his name because he's a friend of the show. And he came on for an episode about the James Bond film that you've never seen. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you should go back and listen to that. It's great. And so he offered to come on and talk about a movie that he is nostalgic about. And it just so happens that I'm nostalgic about it as well, which just makes the episode all the more fun. So welcome to the show, JB.
What are you looking at, butthead?
It could not have been a more perfect beginning right there.
Yeah, it's. I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. I've been on a huge kick on these movies this past week. Not just the movies, but all the extras that came with my 4K set, and so yeah, it's. Yeah, I've been really into them for the last 4 days. So.
Man, well, for you guys, if you didn't already guess from the quote what we're going to be talking about today, it's going to be Back to the Future. And so we're going to be mostly talking about the first movie, but we're also going to touch a little bit on the overall trilogy, its legacy, why we like it so much and everything. So it's going to be, I think, a lot of fun, especially for you guys who were born in the 80s, or born before and grew up, So we're going to get started with kind of just talking a little bit of how we were introduced to this particular film and this particular trilogy. So why don't you get us started, JB?
Well, I cannot remember a world in which I have not seen Back to the Future. It's just one of those. I mean, it was made in 1985. I was born in 1985, so I technically have not lived in a world where the movie didn't exist. Depending on when it came out, I'm not sure. But yeah, I cannot remember the first time I watched it, but I know I was really young, and I mean, I watched it with my parents. Every time it came on, I watched it. I was also like, I kind of watched the show that he was doing at the time, Family Ties, and Teen Wolf was one of my favorites. Like, I just really liked everything that Michael J. Fox did when I was growing up. Plus, the movie Homeward Bound, Incredible Journey.
Oh my gosh,
he was in that as well. He was in that as well. So, so Michael J. is a big part of my childhood, and this movie especially for sure. Like I said, I can't remember not watching it. And then just a few years ago, I remember watching it with my mom at her house. Like, we were just thumbing through it, and like we caught the very beginning of the first one. It was on. I was like, oh, and it was like a marathon on like TBS or something. I was like, oh, heck yes, I know what I'm doing for the next 6 hours.
Man, no, it's so true. I cannot. I'm with you in the sense that I cannot remember the first time I saw it. I do remember I was quite young. I want to say I was probably around maybe 8, maybe 8 or 9, I would say. Because like I grew up watching tons and tons of old movies, like Golden Age of Hollywood, westerns, all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of got started a little bit later with some of the movies, I would say, from the 80s on. So I was a bit older. But I do remember my parents introducing me to Back to the Future, and I just remember I loved it. Like, it was funny, it was exciting, it was unlike anything that I'd seen at the time as a kid. And I remember as a kid loving the guitar solo, Michael J. In the
Mm,
climax of the film.
yeah.
I loved that as a kid. I used to do air guitar like him and stuff. You know, but yeah, so it's like, and then I've seen it so many times since then. And I would definitely say I've seen the first film way more than I've seen the second and third. Because I want to say when I was younger, like I didn't see the trilogy. I just saw the first one, and then it was probably at least 3 or 4 years before I went back and saw the two and completed the trilogy. And so it was a bit weird, a little broken up the way I saw it. But just an amazing movie. And I find too, every time that I rewatch it, I almost feel like I like it more almost. There's some movies that do that, some that get worse the more you see it, and others that just get better. Um,
Yeah.
so since we're on the topic of nostalgia, there's a lot of films obviously that were made in the 80s, and there's a lot of films that even kind of have the same type of a feel almost as Back to the Future, that whole kind of like family coming of age type stories, a lot of science fiction ones. But I would say the vast majority of them are forgotten. I mean, a lot of people just, they've never heard of them, or they don't go back to them. And so in your opinion, what do you think makes people keep going Back to the Future, that makes it so iconic, always being replayed on television, now in 4K? Not all films get that treatment.
Um, yeah, a lot of things, really. I mean, it's so incredibly written. First of all, just with I think Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis both kind of co-wrote this, and they worked with Spielberg. It's just like these guys, they knew what they were doing, and they put this amazing script and screenplay together, and that's just something that kind of transcends. And it also was probably, I know it wasn't the first time travel movie, because you had the Time Machine back in the 60s, and I think there's another big one that came in like the 70s, I believe. I'm trying to think of what it's called,
Yeah,
but
and there's
this
like Time After Time. There was a bunch of them.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That Time After Time, that's the one I was thinking
Mhm.
of. But this Back to the Future was the first blockbuster, right? And of course, Spielberg has always been synonymous with blockbuster, because apparently he made the first one, Jaws. But so yeah, I mean, this was the first one that was like so incredibly big, and not just in America, but all over the world. Like, it was just a phenomenon. And you've got the Huey Lewis soundtrack, The Power of Love, and it's the music really also. Music has a way of hitting people and bringing us back to when we were kids and when we first saw it before. But I think a big thing really that makes this film so different is because this kid, this 17-year-old kid, goes back in time, and he gets to see what his parents were like when they were his age. And I think every kid wonders that. Like, and I think once you get old enough to understand and realize that they actually used to be a kid once upon a time. But everybody wonders what they were like. Were they, you know, all the stuff that they lecture us about, were they worse than we were? So like, it's just cool that he actually gets to go do that. So that was something that I think, kids could latch onto. And I think that's why it was so special for people who grew up in the 80s and 90s, who were watching those. I mean, I think the last one came out in 1990, so I mean they spanned over for 5 or 6 years. So yeah, that's, to me, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's time travel is a very popular thing to explore, and I think this movie is what really made it popular.
I totally agree with you. I think there is, like you said, something about time travel itself that just interests people. And I think it is what you said of kind of like, imagining, the world that you've heard of but never witnessed. And it's
Hmm.
so true because watching this movie, especially like today when I was watching it, that I was thinking like, oh man, I wonder if I went back, like what my parents would have been like, and stuff, because they tell you what they were like, you hear from family and stuff, but you wonder what were they really like, and so I definitely agree with that. And this movie, it was huge at the time. Because I ran a little inflation calculator, because it made, it was 222 million, back in 1985, which is a huge number.
Uh-huh.
I mean, incredible. And the inflation calculator is that if it made that same amount today, would be almost 600 million. Um,
Wow.
which is a very large number. It's like, yeah, we're used to hearing a lot of billion, but when you look at a lot of films that come out, there's not a lot that hit the 600 million mark, especially a movie like this. um
Mm-hmm.
and so it's very interesting. And another point that you brought up too, there being some other types of time travel films that have come across. We mentioned The Time Machine and Time After Time. And if any of you listeners haven't seen either of those films, both of them are excellent. I highly recommend both of them. They both tackle time travel from a different type of angle, and it's very interesting. But I almost felt when I was revisiting this that it almost felt like Back to the Future was maybe the first fun time travel movie, if that makes sense.
Mm,
you
yeah.
know, because you see a lot of other time travel movies about, oh, we have to save the world, or oh, we're hunting a killer, or we're doing, something where it's like this big dramatic effect. And I loved that this movie wasn't really about that. It was a simple story that, it wasn't high stakes, in the sense of like the world is at risk or anything. It was a very character driven story. and uh and I think that kind of being the first, to kind of do that, and kind of bring with it that feel of like, of family and friends and connection, I don't know, is what I think, helps endear it and make people revisit it and want to share it with their kids.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the first fun one, and I guess because you got to, it's about a 17-year-old kid who plays guitar and skateboards. So like, what can not be fun about that?
Exactly. It's so true. He's the typical teen kid. And what I also kind of
Uh-huh.
liked about the movie too is that like so many films like kind of over dramatize the teen years a bit, and I liked how
Hmm.
normal he was, that it's like he wasn't overly
Yes.
snobby or bratty or or anything like that. He was just kind of, he was
Yeah.
somebody you'd meet every day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
hmm and that makes me curious, when you mentioned the name Robert Zemeckis, because he's one of those ones. He's been a name that's been around in Hollywood forever. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and it's very interesting when you look at his. This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but when you look at the stuff that he's produced and written and directed over the years, and it's so eclectic. The guy is like really talented.
Hmm.
And he's like, he directed like Forrest Gump, he produced like Denzel Washington's Flight, he also did like
Hmm.
Contact, with Matthew McConaughey. Uh,
Roger Rabbit.
yeah, Roger Rabbit. Uh-huh.
Hmm.
He's the executive producer. I didn't even know of the TV show Manifest, so it's like,
Oh, nice.
so it's quite incredible. But I agree with you though. I think that there was so much talent behind the camera, in front of the camera, that it was just one of those ones where, as Leonard Maltin would say, everything that could go right went right.
Oh yeah, they definitely caught lightning in the bottle with that.
hmm
And I didn't
No
even
pun
mention.
intended.
Yeah. I swear that I was not. That's good though. That's
uh,
good. Yeah, and I didn't even mention the score from Alan Silvestri. who's also done a lot of incredible work too. So, yeah.
No, that's very, very true. You know, the score is fantastic. You know, it and what I like about the score too is that, you know, it's such a fine line when it comes to music in a movie of whether or not you go, too much under, too much over. And I always found Back to the Future was just the perfect amount, because it's a very understated score, in that you almost don't even notice it until it tells you to notice it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
And I think that's the best kind of score that you can have, that heightens tension or adds comedic value, or something like that. Because, a score really, I mean, a director, directs the film, but a score really sets the mood and tone for it,
Mm-hmm.
if and I'm sure, you watch, as many, if not more, films than I do. And so you know what a bad score can do to a film.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh man. But yeah, let's get into a little bit of this, like, discussing some of the stuff we liked, some of the stuff we didn't like, if there's anything, and just kind of see, just, what we like. Wow. Life in
Better run.
LA. Uh-huh. Oh, I apologize to the listeners if a gang war is about to break out somewhere. Oh man. I always promise when people listen to this that they're always going to get, something new and exciting in every show. And, so, never know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so, let's, what was some of the stuff that stood out to you, in this film, that, maybe some stuff you hadn't noticed before, or just something that keeps, drawing you back with the narrative.
Well, I said the last time I watched this was probably, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was, at my mom's house, and I watched it on TV there. And I bought this 4K set, a couple of years ago, and I hadn't watched it, and I hadn't sat down and watched them, because I knew once I did, this was going to happen. I was going to watch all three, and I was going to watch every single minute of every single extra that's on that set, and I still haven't finished them all. But I'm planning on doing it for the rest of the week. So I mean, I can't stop, But what's funny about it though is I guess I watched it so much growing up that there wasn't really anything that I noticed now that I didn't that I didn't remember. Like, it's just every shot just kind of came back to me. But and speaking of shots, probably my favorite shot of the entire film was the close up of that Red Gibson that he starts to play when he first, they needed a guitarist, and he's like, oh, like he looks at him, and then all of a sudden it just pans to the close up of the guitar, and you see this 17-year-old kid playing in 1955, and he starts just like, and he plays, I think, Earth Angel first with them, but then he goes into Johnny B. Good, which was amazing. Just like so cool. And he was doing all this stuff. I mean, he was doing the Chuck Berry duck walk, and he was mimicking a lot of other guitarists too. Like, he did some Clapton and Hendrix in there. So it was really cool to watch that. And because I don't know, I guess I hadn't really paid attention to what he was doing there, but he was mimicking a lot of his guitar heroes, which was really cool. But one thing, I guess the one thing that really kind of stuck out for me on this time that I guess I didn't really pay that much attention before was actually two. But the first one was the kiss between George and Lorraine, his parents. It was just like he had just gotten through punching this guy to get off of her, and that was the biggest thing, was he never stood up for himself. And going back to 1985, in the beginning of the movie, George was this kind of timid pushover kind of guy that just, lets Biff walk all over him, and, lets everyone walk all over him, really. And he's just this little wimp, basically. And, when he goes back to, when Marty goes back to 1955, he kind of sets it up to where, he's going to have him punch him out, but then he ends up having to punch Biff because he just, Biff steps in and starts, macking on Lorraine, and he, George gets pushed down, and then he turns around, and I guess because he really was already in love with Lorraine, even though she didn't really even know that he existed, but he wants to protect her, and something deep down inside of him just felt like he needed to defend her, and so he reached back and he just punches his lights out, right? And we'll talk more about that later as far as standing up to bullies. But, after that, that's when they came in. They danced to that song, Earth Angel, and you got the Starlights. I think that's what they were called, with Marty playing guitar and singing that song, Earth Angel, will you be mine? And some guy cuts in, and then George says no, and he pushes him away, and he reaches out and he grabs her and he kisses her. And it's like one of the greatest Hollywood kisses I've ever seen. And it means so much because that's what brought his family back together. Because that's what they said earlier, that, for the first time he kissed me on the dance floor, that's when I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. And sure enough, the picture faded back right after the kiss, and Marty was able to play guitar again because he was failing. I don't know, that just hit me this time. I guess because I'm older and I have a little bit more of a heart for romance than I did when I used to watch it growing up. So
That's really funny you mentioned that, because it is true. I think that as we get older, we start to appreciate different stuff with film more. And yeah, so growing up, I didn't really appreciate romance as much as I do now. I love a good romance story. I love a rom-com. And it was so great seeing George, because when you first see him in the film, he's really an insipid character.
mm,
It's like you see he's like kind of ignoring his family. He's like just watching
yep.
TV. He's being walked all over by Biff. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like you really kind of don't like his character a lot. You're kind of like, that's his dad. Um, but then seeing, like you said, him blossom kind of into this character who's protective, who's romantic, and then of course, later on when you see him, how those events changed him in the future, it's just great. And the kiss, I agree with you, is one of Hollywood's great kisses. It's not over the top. It's just very real and very poignant, and I think that's what just makes it so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
One aspect that you mentioned, that I actually wrote down in my notes that I liked, was I really liked the fading photo. Was
Yeah.
something I really liked, because we've seen variations of that in time travel movies since Back to the Future, um, but when I first saw it, I really just thought it was such an interesting idea to kind of create this kind of tension a little bit that kind of moves the story forward, because we already have a little bit of that with Doc saying, okay, you have 7 days basically until the lightning comes, and you need to not mess up anything for the future. So you have a little bit of it there, but I really liked how they introduced that. Okay, there's a problem now, and you're on a ticking clock basically of your own existence going away.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very clever. I thought it was very, very interesting. And I don't know why I liked it, but I really liked how he had it pinned on his guitar. I don't know. I really like, really liked that
Mm,
scene. It was
that's
just,
cool.
it was just a really cool image. And then when they pan onto it and you see his siblings pop back onto it, with the kiss, it's a great moment. And it's a moment that actually some people may disagree with me, but I would actually argue that the climax of the film actually is the guitar solo, and is the kiss. That when he's going back, a lot of people view that as the climax, but I actually don't view that as the climax of the film. And so some people might disagree with me with that, but that's always the way I viewed it as. Um, so what do
Yeah.
we? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think you're right there, because that's the big pivotal moment, like that everything that they've done up to that point leads up to that kiss. So yeah, I agree. That's the climax, and
Mhm.
everything that happens after that is just kind of, the aftermath and epilogue, basically. There you go. That's what I was looking for.
Epilogue. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a perfect way. Yeah, yeah, because it's interesting because I remember reading about when I was reading about like story formatting, whether it's with novels or screenplays or whatever, and it was interesting how they were talking about the 3-act story. They were talking about the of how you go with a climax of a story, and it was interesting how they were saying how sometimes movies can have their climax before the end of the film, and then the rest of the film is the unwinding epilogue of the consequences of that. And that's what I kind of feel like with this, was that even though it takes place a little while before the ending, I think it works really well. um you know one thing too is I want to talk a little bit about the film's humor as well.
Mm.
You know yeah.
1.21 gigawatts.
The film, in my opinion, was so interesting in its use of humor, because it's at times almost a little slapstick, but then it's also a bit of a rom-com a little bit. It has a little bit more like adult humor at times. I don't know. It was very interesting, the blending of kind of what it did with that. And I was going to ask you your opinion on that.
Man, like something that I quote all the time, and my wife will tell you the same thing. Um, it's whenever Marty says, or no, when Doc Brown says, "If you're from 1985, who's the president?" He says Ronald Reagan. He says, "The actor? What? Who's his vice president? Jerry Lewis?"
Oh, that whole monologue of that is amazing.
It's just so awesome. And I actually was one of the things that I actually watched on it, and actually I'd heard this before, but Reagan actually got a screening of this movie when it came out, or actually I guess before it really came out. He got to watch a screening of it in the White House, and with that line when it said, Ronald Reagan, the actor, they said that he laughed so hard and for so long that he missed like the next 10 seconds of the movie. He's like, okay, no, we got to back up. We got to rewind it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Uh, that line is so great, because it is true, because I remember talking with some of my family members, because I was a big political junkie in college and stuff, and a
Mhm.
lot of them mentioned about how it was weird with Reagan getting into politics, because they remembered him as an actor in like cowboy movies and gangster movies. So it's like, it's I love that line.
Yeah,
Everything,
for
like
sure.
everything about Doc Brown is just great.
He's like Christopher Lloyd, just like he lives that character, man. He's like the great thing about it is he is so serious 100% of the time, and he's freaking hilarious. Like he's that his character is crazy and outrageous, and it's there for humor, and it's all over the place, but he is zoned in and serious in everything that he does, and it's just that's what makes it so hilarious.
That is very true, because I don't think he doesn't. The only joke he ever kind of cracks is the one right at the end when he shows him the note and he says, well, what about all of that changing the future, devastating effects? And he's just like, whatever. you know um, like, I think that's the only semi humorous thing that he says from his point of view that's meant to be funny.
Yeah.
Because even like when when Marty's back, in 1955, and he goes to his house and he has that mind reading contraption on his head, and he's like, he is fully invested. This is going to work. It is not a joke. Uh,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
it's, oh man.
What's funny, you mentioned about the comedy, and on one of the things that I watched, this actually is on Hulu. It's called Back in Time. I think it's called Back in Time, and it's available on Hulu. That's where I watched it because it's not on my set. But it's basically a bunch of most of it is about the fans and a lot of people that collect stuff like DeLoreans, and this guy built a golf course. Like, it's a lot of it is about the fans, but a lot of it also is behind the scenes stuff and like people talking about the people that made it, different things. And Spielberg is on there and he's being interviewed, and he was talking about Doc Brown and Marty McFly. He said that duo, that comedic on-screen duo, in his opinion, was the best duo he's ever seen since Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. And I'm like, wow. those are some big shoes to fill.
That is huge. That's a
And
huge
think about
compliment.
exactly. And think about how many years between Hope and Crosby, like from the 50s, I think, all the way up to 1985. So yeah,
Wow.
that's a huge statement right there.
That is. And you know what? I think I do agree with him, because I remember watching all those movies with them with, the On the Road series, I think they were called. And
Road to Bali, Road to Zanzibar, and all those. Yeah.
yeah, and they were so funny and they had great timing and chemistry, and that is so true. That they had amazing chemistry together in Back to the Future, that there wasn't any moment in the film where it didn't feel like they'd been friends for a long time or known each other for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a lot of the heart too with that, like when they hug at the end and stuff. It's just it's you really feel kind of that bonding between the two of them. you know the Going back a little bit to the humor side, there was one moment that it gets me every time I watch it, and I always burst out laughing as soon as it pops up, is the idea of Libyan terrorists in a Volkswagen van. there's just it is the most ridiculous image ever, but it works. It works so well. But it's so, I don't know who thought of it, but it was just, I don't know. I laugh every time I see it. It's like,
Yeah, that is pretty.
oh,
Yeah.
it's great. There's just so many moments of great of great humor. Him stealing the plutonium. And I gave them their bomb back with pinball parts in it. It's like uh,
Yeah.
man, but you know with this film too, one thing that and we touched on it a little bit, when it came to the humor and stuff, was that this was, obviously it was a family film. It was meant to be something that everybody could go to together and see it. But I was surprised when I was rewatching it a little bit of how many adult themes there are in it, though. That it's compared to like the so-called family films that we see nowadays. It's
Mhm.
actually pretty adult at times. uh, and I don't know if that was just a product of its time, of the 80s, or I don't know, if like people being a little bit too sheltered a little bit now when it comes to like family and like kids movies. I'm not 100% sure. um but it was something that I thought was kind of interesting, of just some of the ideas in it that that would be probably considered way too controversial, to put in like a family, like semi kids movie nowadays.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised with it being. It's just rated PG, but it seems like it had an awful lot of cursing in it to be like like
Yeah, I picked that up too when I was watching it today. I was like, man, this has a little bit more than I remember.
yeah, more than I would imagine a PG movie that I would let my 6-year-old watch. You know what I mean? So
It's true. it is funny when you look back, I'm sure with your childhood and, and looking back on mine and stuff, that some of you think back at some of the movies your parents let you watch, as a kid, and you're like, man, why did they do that? It's like, but then
Yep,
we wouldn't have our fun conversations like this, uh,
exactly.
oh,
Exactly. Hey,
yeah.
one thing I wanted to mention that I looked this up. That when I mentioned the Red Gibson that he was playing,
Yes. Hmm.
that was actually a mistake because that particular guitar, the Gibson ES 345, did not come out until 1958.
Really?
Yep.
So that was that. Oh, so that was a mistake that got slipped in there.
Uh huh. Yep.
Oh, I love reading about like goofs in movies and stuff. There's like
Yep.
I think one of the most famous ones I think was in Ben Hur. One of the Roman centurions has like a wristwatch on. I think it's like oh, um, but it's interesting because one bit of trivia. I guess we can talk a little bit about trivia. You've seen a lot of the behind the scenes featurettes and stuff. Uh, one thing that both saddens me a little bit, but also makes me happy as well. Was I think it was in 2015. It was with Robert Zemeckis. That they asked him about doing like a reboot, or a legacy sequel or something like that to it, because a lot of people were asking for it. Um, and I think it might have been when the deep fake stuff was coming out, and somebody did like some deep fake with Tom Holland or something. In Back to the Future, and he said basically that as long as he maintains the rights to the film, that there will never be a reboot or a sequel made to it.
Yep.
And like I said, at the same time, I was a little sad because I would love to see some type of a legacy sequel or something, But then I also was kind of like, I'm very happy that this trilogy is preserved,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
he said in one of the interviews that I watched, he said that he'll never make another one, but you know what? He'll leave the rights to his kids, and if they want to make one, they can. So we might still see one.
uh,
I just have to. I mean, I don't. I mean, I don't want him to die, but I'm just
no,
saying.
yeah.
Eventually, we might see one, just like we saw. The new Ghostbusters movie that was made by Reitman's Ivan Reitman's son, Jason Reitman. So like it could happen,
Uh, yeah, and I think like I haven't seen the new Ghostbusters movie yet, but I have heard from a lot of fans that they actually said that they thought it was good and that it like respected the franchise while carrying it forward and stuff.
I think
So
so.
yeah, so I think like those type of legacy sequels, they can work if they have the right team behind it, the right writing, and so sometimes in my mind I'll think like, oh man, having a Back to the Future 4, with his kids, or even some people just like discovering the plans for the DeLorean or something. I don't know. I think it could be kind of cool, but I also understand that he kind of wants to keep it the way it was.
Well, the thing is, it would be hard to do because Michael J. Fox can't really act anymore.
Yeah, he's pretty much retired now.
Yeah, I mean, he's he's got Parkinson's really bad. So like his acting is very limited. He's had a couple of cameos on TV shows over the years, but I mean his screen time, he can't be on screen for very long because of the disease is kind of taken over. And it's really 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 sad because my gosh, like I said, I grew up watching him so much. Um but yeah,
He's a
so
tremendous actor,
oh yeah.
just so, and his disease and diagnosis was so tragic because it really did, cut, a career that I can't even imagine how far he would have gone. I mean, it's like, I mean, he was, at the age he was at, he was more famous than Tom Cruise was at that age,
Mhm.
um, and I think that he already is remembered as one of the great comedic actors of our time, and I think that just would have probably continued and gone up even more if he would have been able to keep acting in the capacity that he did before.
Yeah, if you look at most of the actors who have been around for a long time, they didn't start getting like big time Academy Oscar bait movies until they were in their 40s. And he kind of got that taken away from him. He couldn't have he he was never able to break out into those movies like and get those big awards. Like guys like I don't know, Clooney, McConaughey, guys like that. They didn't really like hit their stride until they were in their 40s.
Yeah,
Well,
that's very true.
so yeah, I mean, the guy was just an incredible actor at such a young age. So for him to get that diagnosis so young and it just kind of take over him, man, it's just it's such a sad case. And
Oh,
I don't want to turn this into that that kind of podcast, but man, yeah,
but no,
just
it's true. It is very sad, because it's, his performance in Back to the Future. I mean, it's iconic, I mean, and so is Lloyd's as well. But it's two roles that I don't think will ever be surpassed at all, in my
no.
opinion. You know, um, and it's interesting too. One bit of trivia too that I ran across when I was doing a little bit of research was that apparently the inspiration for the film came from Bob Gale discovering his father's high school yearbook and wondering basically what the friends of his father were like, and like what
Hmm.
it would be like to see what his father's friends were like. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting that like just running running across a high school yearbook spawned this iconic trilogy. It's it was like, man,
Yeah,
I can only hope someday that I create something from something so basic.
yeah,
um
exactly.
uh Man.
And
Uh,
one other thing that I meant to mention earlier when we were talking about a reason why this is so nostalgic and why it stands the test of time is, the fact that they went back to the 50s. That was significant too, because the 50s was when American teen culture was really beginning. And so for a teenager to watch this movie, they see how kids are getting more independent and doing this, doing that, and they're driving cars and like it's just and they have their own music and they have their own dances and like that this is when teens started being more individual. You know what I mean?
no, I agree with you, and that's something I actually hadn't really thought of. But that's very true because before the 1950s, really there was no such thing as a teenager. Really,
Yeah,
you were a kid, you were a child, and then you were an adult, basically.
yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of that came from the type of I don't know, situate the type of world that was being lived in, because you think like going from the 1800s to the Victorian era, you then had World War One, you had World War Two. People had to grow up really quickly, and it's like it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of um, leisure, I guess you could say. And the 50s was really the first time where the early 50s, I should say, the whole world was really able to kind of be in prosperity, and especially America. I mean, America was just booming during the early 50s.
Hmm.
And it was kind of interesting because I wrote an article actually about the Criterion Collection's War of the Worlds from 1953, I think it was. And one thing that I mentioned was a little bit of what we were talking about with like the 50s, that it was made during a time that was right before the paranoia of like communism and like the terror of the like nuclear holocaust was coming in, and it was like right in between that period, where it was just going into that, but it was still in that prosperity era. And so I think that it's kind of interesting. And you know one thing that I noticed about the time period of the 1950s, of them going back to it, was that it was something I really liked, was that it was a very stylized 1950s, that and like with the music, the clothing, just everything about it just kind of felt like very surreal almost. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Hmm.
And it almost made me wonder if it's kind of like how they always say you look back on with rose-colored glasses on the past. It's like, we look back on our childhood of like, I'm not sure how old you are. But like I look back on, I grew up mostly in the 90s, and I look back on like, oh man, how wonderful the 90s was. um, and it's like, I'm sure if I really went back to the 90s, it probably wouldn't be quite as good as I remember it. And so it almost kind of felt like the people who were making Back to the Future, that they were creating their ideal 1950s almost. I don't know. It was just kind of a thought that went through my head.
Yeah, that's a good point. And speaking of the 50s, also, with the 80s, and Zemeckis mentioned this in the interview, that what happens after well after he punches Biff, that kind of changes his future. And so in the future, the um, George is a very accomplished author, novelist, and his house is decorated extravagantly, and he's got all these nice cool trinkets, and Marty's got this brand new truck. And Zemeckis was saying that is such a very 80s thing, because that was the me generation back then.
Mm,
And something like that ending would not go over well today, because people would kind of view those things as you're just being too showy or whatever, like, which
mhm.
to me is total crap. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having nice things. Like,
No, nothing at
like,
all. No.
like,
Oh, no, that's a really good point, because a lot of times that kind of stuff is looked down on, especially in like time travel movies. Like I feel like so many time travel movies nowadays get so hung up on like the quote unquote rules of time travel, and like stuff being changed or whatever. And I liked that this movie just kind of threw all that to the wind a bit. And and I liked that it kind of portrayed that his family being changed was a good thing. And like you said, what's wrong with him having a hot car? It's like, what's wrong with his dad, achieving his dreams basically, that he wanted as a teen but never accomplished. you know
well, yeah,
but
and it's also a good commentary on what happens when we stand up to bullies.
Mhm.
Like, it completely it can change our lives, and it actually did for him. So, I mean, there's good lessons in there, man. Like,
No, that's a is a really good point, because everybody when when people look at their lives and stuff, a lot of times they just think like, oh, this moment doesn't matter, or oh, what I do right now doesn't matter.
hmm,
And I liked how this movie just showed that the little things do matter, and that it can, like you said, it can change your life. You don't know, a decision that you make now might come back to affect you years later in a positive way or a negative way, and another decision might not have any effect whatsoever. It's like, you don't really know. But yeah, I agree with you. That's a great point, that that standing up to bullies in your life is I don't think it's ever a bad thing.
yeah, and anybody who thinks that the little things don't matter obviously has not seen the butterfly effect.
Oh man, that is actually a movie that I have not seen, that I need to see. I've heard so much
What?
about it, and I don't know how. It's is that the one with Jake Gyllenhaal?
No, it's
Oh no, I
that
was thinking Donnie Darko. I
that's
was talking
Donnie Darko. No, this is with Ashton Kutcher.
Ashton Kutcher. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. I need to, because I need to see. I know there's two different cuts of that movie. I know. I
Oh,
know that, and I know
yeah.
that some people say one is better than the other. But yeah. So I need to look and see which one is supposedly the better one and watch that one.
I,
So
I'll tell you what's the better one.
okay, which one is the better one for you?
In my opinion, the theatrical cut is the better one. Not the
Okay.
and this and I don't normally say this, because I normally prefer the director's cut, but
Mhm.
I think the director's cut, it's it's too dark. Like,
Okay,
and
then I
it's
I think I know which one you're talking about now that you say it's too dark, because I remember thinking, "Wow, that's dark."
yeah,
So,
and it doesn't really make any sense. Like, you have to watch it because the director's cut, the ending in the movie, it makes zero sense to me because he's going off of memories, and this what he does in that scene. I can't. I can't. I don't want to mess it. You just need to watch the movie. Just
Okay.
watch it, and then watch the theatrical, and then watch the alternate ending, because I think on HBO, it's on HBO Max right now. So I
Okay.
think you can watch both of them on there. The I think both versions are on there. So I would just watch the original ending and then watch the like the end of the director's cut. So because
Okay.
there's
Okay.
not a whole lot that's changed. I'm trying to. You can look up what's different later on. There's a few things, a couple of scenes here and there that are just like 10 seconds here
Mm,
added on to it. So it's not really a whole lot. So
mm. Yeah, it's not a Zack Snyder's Justice League situation.
no, it's not a Zack's. No. It's not two. It's not two movies in one. Um,
Uh,
but it is the ending is what is the big thing. That you can go ahead and watch that alternate ending, and then you can come back and talk to me about it because it's messed up.
okay. That'll be interesting because I generally there's been sometimes that I've liked an alternate ending to a film better than the other, and sometimes I haven't. There's been a few times that I'm like, why in the world was that alternate ending cut? Like that was so much better. It sounds like this one might not be the case. So,
Yeah.
oh, you know, one thing too that I found very interesting about like Back to the Future as a whole, like the entire trilogy as a whole, was that it was one of the first. I don't want to say the first, but it was one of the first movies from the 70s and 80s that had a blatant sequel tease at the end. Um, like it seemed like in kind of the 70s throughout the 80s that you had films that they were all designed really to be one-off movies, and that you might get a sequel later on, but then that was another kind of one-off, almost like I'm thinking of almost like Lethal Weapon, that it was a completely encapsulated story in one, and then it went on to the same thing with the second. And so, with this one, it was very interesting of kind of having that first movie that being like, hey, you know what, we're going to do another one, and so, and it was interesting because I don't remember seeing that before in like in an 80s movie. And like I said, maybe I just haven't seen another one that did it, but I thought it was interesting.
Well, they actually said, of course, they can be blowing smoke, but Bob Gale and I can't remember if it was Gale or Zemeckis that said that they weren't actually they weren't planning on doing a sequel. They were just kind of making an ending to where like, oh, they got to go on another adventure. Like it was just kind of that's how they were ending the movie.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, like they were just going to end it that way. But it, you can kind of look at it now and say, oh, well, they're definitely, talking about the next movie or whatever. And whenever it got released on home video, that was when it had gotten green lighted to do a sequel. So on the home video, that's when it started showing to be continued at the end of the movie. So
Interesting. Okay,
so
that's fascinating.
so anybody who watched it on home video first, they thought that it's just a cash grab, like they're doing this on purpose to lead you into the next one. But that wasn't in the original. Like the to be continued thing wasn't in the original cut, but the ending, like I said, was supposed to be just the ending, like which is kind of
Wow.
cool. You don't see stuff like that. Like you never,
No.
yeah,
That you don't really like. I mean, that's a very ballsy like move, really.
uh huh,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, because I guess that it can be the case because I was reading an interview with the I can't remember his name now. He's the director who just did Morbius, Daniel something. I can't remember his last name. And they were talking to him about his sci-fi horror film Life. I don't know if you've seen that one or not. Um, and basically like the movie, the way the movie ends, and in case you haven't seen it, I won't tell you the ending. But the way the movie ends, it feels like a blatant like sequel tease, like, oh, they're going for Life
Uh,
Part Two, and and the movie didn't do very well, and so there was no sequel, and so I kind of just was like, oh, whatever, we're never going to get the sequel. Well, then when I was reading the interview a couple of days ago, they mentioned, they're like, oh, I really liked your film, Life, and it's a shame we never got to see Life 2. And he said, oh yeah, he said, I didn't, and he said exactly what Zemeckis and them said. He said, like, oh, he's like, that was just the ending I wrote. He's like, he's like, yeah, he's like, if they would have asked me, I would have done a second one. But he said, when I first sat down to write that script, he's like, that was just the ending that I envisioned for the movie. And so it was kind of interesting that there are a few directors who do that. So I actually do, if you haven't seen it, I do recommend Life. It's a decent sci-fi horror. But I would say, like, if you're a little bit squeamish, I would say maybe pass on it, because there's a few moments that are kind of cringe. So
nah,
um,
I'm usually pretty. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it, but I have been wanting to watch it. It's been on my list for like ever.
I kind of put it in like almost like a spiritual Alien trilogy, where you have like the 1979 Alien, and then there's like Life, and then the third one that I put into the spiritual trilogy is Kristen Stewart's Underwater.
Mm.
I kind of put all three of those together because they have such similar themes, and they're definitely homages, kind of to each other, and so it's interesting. So so that's so to listeners, I would say that's that trilogy I would recommend, the the Alien Life Underwater trilogy. So
Interesting.
yeah, so it's kind of fun. I like to do that occasionally, where I'll take films with similar themes and I put them into like trilogies or series together.
Nice.
um so but yeah, so what would you say, with this particular film, like what is the ranking that you give it, of like your rating and your ranking of the trilogy?
uh, it's a 5-star film all day. The
Mhm.
first one is, um, and the trilogy as a whole is, to me, The Dark Knight is the gold standard in trilogies, in my opinion. The Nolan Batman trilogy is my number one, and nothing will ever top that, because in my opinion, those are 3 5-star movies. That's a 15-star trilogy, is what.
I
Um,
would agree with you, honestly.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, but then after that, honestly, I would probably put Back to the Future as my second favorite. If we're just talking about trilogies, I mean, yeah, I can throw different franchises out there. Like, I still think Rocky might be my favorite franchise as a whole,
Ooh, that's
just
good.
because,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I love the stories, man. But then, to me, as a trilogy, Back to the Future is right up there underneath The Dark Knight. And actually, this particular film is my number 4 all time.
Mm.
And what's funny about that is it's my number 4 all time favorite film, but it's only my second favorite film from 1985.
That is actually really funny. What's your first from 1985? I have to ask now.
It's The Breakfast Club.
Oh, okay. That's actually one I have not seen. Weirdly enough,
Oh
everybody
man.
looks at me with a huge side eye when I I tell them that I have not.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh, man.
uh, man. Oh,
I
that's really
I
funny
will
though.
I, I think that's available for a Screen Pass, and if it is, I'm going to send you one.
Oh, hey, you know what? I will watch it if you're able to, and you send it to me. I will watch it. I can give you that promise.
Nice.
Oh man. Oh, out of the Back to the Future trilogy itself, of those three films, how would you rank those three films, with like a 1 to 3?
Ooh. Um, if you would have asked me this 4 days ago, I would have said 1, 2, 3 in that order. But man, it's hard because I connected more with that third one this time than the second one.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking like one is my number one. Period. Like I said, it's my fourth favorite movie of all time. So, but I would probably say that the third one is probably the second best, even though I think the second one might be a little bit more fun, you know?
Mhm.
So it's just kind of what you're looking for. The second one is like, it's really cool and really fun, especially when you're a teenager and you see this guy going around town on a hoverboard. It's so cool. And it's really, the second one's really interesting too, because like all of this stuff that they predicted about the future, about what's going to happen in 2015, like
Mhm.
over half of it came true.
Didn't they have like Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D or something in
Jaws
that?
19 or something. Yeah.
Jaws 19, yeah, it was
Yeah.
something.
But it was like a 3D Jaws that was coming out as a hologram.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and so, but like, and what's funny is they predicted the Cubs to win the World Series. Well, I mean, they were a year late, or they were a year early because they won it in 2016. But man, that's that might be the most far fetched thing that they said.
Yeah. I know that was like a Simpsons level prediction, you know. It's like,
Yeah, right. Exactly,
oh.
exactly. So
Oh.
I would say 1, 3, 2 would be my ranking though. I think that Western was really really cool. Like especially since they had never done a Western before. Zemeckis hadn't done any Westerns, and for him to go full on Old West, yeah, I think he did a really good job with it, and I think the actors like yeah, I think that duo is did well in the Western setting. So
So yeah, so I would say, 100%, Back to the Future, it's 5 stars. I'd give it more stars if I could.
yeah,
There's honestly, I don't think there's anything that I dislike in the movie at all. Like I pretty much love everything, and I can't really see any flaws either. That are like storytelling or character flaws or anything like that. I'm sure maybe there's a few filmmaking things that if we got really nitty gritty, we could get into, but overall, the film is almost as close to a perfect film, I think, as you can get. So definitely 5 stars.
or
Now I would,
you could give it 1.21 gigawatt stars.
yeah, let's do that. Let's do
Sorry,
that.
go ahead.
Oh, then when it comes to the trilogy, I'm going to be watching part 2 and 3 later on this week, because both of them are on TBS. So I'm going to check out those ones. But I would say my current rating from the last time that I saw them, or ranking, is, I would say 1, 2, 3 right now. I really like 2, and I do enjoy 3. By saying it's my least favorite is not necessarily even saying I don't like it or I don't think it's a good movie at all. It's just, from what I remember of the second one, I really liked that one a lot. Now, after rewatching the trilogy for this week, my opinions may change with that. Because I've been appreciating Westerns. I loved them as a kid, and I've been appreciating them kind of more over this last like year or two. So that one might climb up when I rewatch it. But you know, uh, and I would say when it comes to trilogy, ranking, I would say too of, man, because like my favorite trilogy of all time, it kind of jumps around a little bit. It changes a little bit because the original Star Wars trilogy has often been my number one. But then there was a couple of other ones, like you said, The Dark Knight, that kind of took that place for a little while. And and then I recently watched through the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing trilogy. So I don't know, it kind of bounces around a little bit, but I would say probably I would 100% say the Back to the Future is probably top 4 trilogy, my top 4 trilogies of all time. um it's a little, I would say maybe original Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Dark Knight, then I would say maybe Back to the Future. Then I would say with Indiana Jones coming in at number 5.
Nice.
But like I said, it kind of does change around a lot, including my my top movies of all time, that changes. But I've finally decided this year that I'm going to make a definitive like top 50 movies of all time of my lists on Letterboxd. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, I've got this will be the third year in a row that I've redone my top 100 list in April.
Mm.
So and it changes every year. So I'm really excited to do that. I use this ranking engine called, I think, Meet People or something like that.
Mm.
But it's basically you just put in all the movies that you're wanting to. Like I think my list is like 300 deep or something, and then it asks you. It takes 2 movies at a time. It says, do you prefer this one or this one? And you just click on it and you just keep clicking, and it goes through, thousands, like it goes through every single way that it can. And then it spits out a ranking when you're done. Like it's going to take hours to do it, but you could save your work and do it and go back to it later. So,
That's really cool.
yeah, it works, man, because I think usually I'll kind of tweak it at the end, but it's fun to redo it. So I'm looking forward to doing that again here in the next couple of days, probably.
Man,
So
yeah. If you could send me the link to that, I would be very interested in trying that because, like I said, I haven't ever done a like definitive, full list. Like I've done ones that are like, oh, okay, yeah, this is my, my top 5 films or top 10 or whatever. I've done those, but I really wanted to do a more comprehensive one. So that would be very interesting, and it would be interesting to see if my top changes or not. Because right now, John Wayne's The Searchers is my favorite film of all time. So we'll see if that changes
nice.
or not. but man, yeah, JB, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you. We always have great conversations, and I always enjoy it immensely.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm always up for talking about 80s movies, especially Back to the Future.
Oh, hey, that's the thing. Whenever people tell me, hey, what, I'm up for conversations, I'm always like, I will hit you up for future episodes. Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, go ahead and let the listeners know, kind of like what you're up to, like where they can find your work and stuff like that.
Well, I actually started a podcast last week. Actually, well, I don't know when this is going to be released, but it was released it on March the 31st. It's called Manly Movies, and I have a different guest on every other week, and Byron's been on for a couple of them. His episodes have not been released yet, but we just discuss movies that appeal to men, like your Rockies and Rambos and stuff like that, which I have not covered yet, but those will come. Believe me, those movies will come. And we look at them from an angle of, the lessons that they can teach us about being a man, because, we all need help. Like all the husbands and fathers and brothers and sons out there, and we all need help, and we all need sharpening. So that's kind of what I'm about. I don't have all the answers. The movies don't have all the answers, but we can sure discuss them, and kind of find something in there there's always nuggets in every movie that you watch that can kind of teach us about life. And so that's kind of where we're going. I'm on Facebook. I'm in the Feel and Film Facebook group. You can probably find me there if you're in there. If not, I'm on Twitter, and I don't use personal Twitter anymore. I'm just on there under Manly Movies 1. So you can hit me up on there. So, and I'm always plugging movies on there. I try to anyway.
And I can definitely say, I highly recommend his podcast. It's very good, and I'm not just saying that because I've been on it. Um, you know, it's very it's very original, and it has like great content, and it does make you think, with the aspect of family and what it is to be a man. It's very enjoyable. And you know what? I one thing I will do, just for whenever in the far future it comes up, I will throw my hat in to come on and discuss Rambo: Last Blood with you.
Nice.
Because I actually have a bit more appreciation for that movie than a lot of people do. So, and there is a director's cut of that one too. So when you get to it, I would suggest watching the director's cut and not the theatrical.
Yeah, it's weird. That's and I hate this because I'm a really I love Stallone. Like every movie that I've seen him in, whether he's acting, directing, whatever, I love the guy. And Rocky's my favorite franchise of all time. And I grew up watching the Rambo movies. I watched all the first three, that came out in the 80s, and then I watched the one that came out a few years ago, Rambo. I think it was just called Rambo. I came back in like
Yeah.
2008, I think.
Mhm.
But I have not seen Last Blood. But I own the movie. I have it. I just haven't watched it. That's probably going to be the next franchise I dive into, because it's been a long time since I've watched the originals too. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's definitely I won't say anything because it was uh the director's cut was basically the same movie. But there's about 15 to 20 minutes of a first act that is in it that was cut in the theatrical. Um and so it's like a decent, like, kind of like a character development arc with John Rambo's character of where he is at the beginning of that movie. I have no idea why they cut it, because it was a great little setup for some later on stuff. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I'm definitely interested. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that movie, because like I said, I liked it a lot better than some of the other friends that I have, how they felt about it. But yeah, so that will be interesting. So definitely everybody check out JB's podcast. And also, if you like what you're hearing here, feel free to subscribe to Under the Lens with Byron Lafayette. I'm going to be releasing a lot more episodes now. I kind of took a little bit of a break, but I have some exciting ones that I'm going to be recording soon and releasing. You can like my Facebook page of Under the Lens, and we also have a Twitter account for the podcast, and you can also follow me at Byron Lafayette on Twitter, and you can see all my hot takes and and views on films. So, and as JB said, feel free to join us in the Feeling Film podcast group. A lot of great people in there, and some really good discussions for films. And if you were in there last week, you could have seen my Blockbuster hat that I just bought. So
that was pretty sweet.
it was pretty cool. I couldn't believe it when I found it. I was like, I immediately bought it, and so that's going to be my go-to hat for a little while. So
Nice.
yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Definitely share this episode with your friends, and let us know anywhere that you follow us what you think of Back to the Future, and if you agree with us, if you don't agree with us, especially if you disagree with us, please let us know. That's always very interesting.
And I will
So,
fight you.
yes, and JB will fight you, and I will grab some popcorn and sit back and watch. So, oh man,
I will go.
well,
I will go George McFly on you.
yeah. Man, well, thanks all for joining us, and until next time.